Little wife came, and I think I met her at a bus depot, and the bus was running late. And right across the street was a coffee shop. Oh my, I could have used a cup of coffee. But you know what I knew? Just as soon as I go in that restaurant and have a cup of coffee, the bus will drive up, and I won't be at the door to meet her. And as I was sitting in the car mulling all that over, I thought of this verse right here. Now, this is exactly the frame of mind of these 12 men. They weren't about to go down to Cairo. They weren't about to go to Rome. They weren't about to go anywhere else, because just as sure as they'd leave Jerusalem, what would happen? The Messiah would come again, and they'd be gone. And so, in spite of all the pressure of this horrible persecution, these 12 men stayed in Jerusalem. Contrary to the Word of God? Not at all, because Peter understood that he had no ministry to the Gentiles until Israel's king was in place. Now, this is kind of hard for us to swallow. It took me a long time to just even from the Word, be ready to pass it on. But once you see that, boy, the Bible just opens up, and just as clear as a bell, you can see that Peter and the 11 perfectly well understood that they could not go out and evangelize the Gentile world until this had come to fruition. Now then, this is chapter 8. Now if you'll go on over just for a moment to chapter 11 in Acts, and it'll back it up, what I've just said, even a little more. In Acts chapter 11, drop down to verse 19, where it says, "Now they who were scattered abroad upon the persecution that arose about Stephen," in other words, the people referred to in Acts 8, verse 1, "these that were scattered abroad went as far as Phoenix and Cyprus and Antioch." Now that Antioch was up north of present-day Beirut. "And they went as far as Antioch, preaching the word," that is the Old Testament, "to," what's the next word? "None but Jews," what? "Only." Now isn't that plain? Here we are 7 years after Pentecost, and the word is so plain. Nobody was going to Gentiles. It was Jew only. Why? Because this was the program that they knew. No one has told them anything different. Now, after chapter 8, and I don't say this facetiously, what's the next one? Chapter 9. And what in the world takes place in chapter 9? Conversion of Paul or Saul of Tarsus. On the way to Damascus. For what purpose? Oh, to fulfill his tremendous religious zeal, to stamp out the followers of this impostor from Nazareth, who Saul thought was nothing but a blasphemer, and he, in his religious zeal, was going to stamp it out at any cost. But before he gets to Damascus, you know what happened. He has that confrontation from the ascended, glorified Lord of glory, and the part I want to point out here is down to verse 12, 11 and 12 of this chapter 9, where the Lord speaks to Ananias, that believing Jew up there in Damascus. And he says in verse 11, "Arise and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he prayeth." Now he's already had that experience out there on the road. Verse 12, "And he hath seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in, putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. And Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to the saints at Jerusalem," that is, the Jewish believers. "And here at Damascus he has authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name." And now lock in verse 15. "But the Lord said unto him," and Israel in this interval of time that we had back there in Psalms chapter 2, undetermined, but before the wrath and vexation would come in, Israel has kept right on rejecting and rejecting and rejecting. And so now God says we're going to do something totally different. And what is it? He's going to save this Jew, this religious zealot, by grace. And now read on of what God says to Ananias. For he's going to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings, that is, the kings of the world, and the children of Israel. Now we always have to remember that the age of grace, again, is predominantly Gentile, just like back here was predominantly Jew, but there can be some Jews saved. A Jew is not locked out of salvation in grace, but it's predominantly Gentile in its nature. And then verse 6, before any of the New Testament really